Hi, friends. Thanks for joining us today. I have a special guest with me, Dr. Paul Thomas, MD. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate you hopping on here to share some valuable insights.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Dr. Paul Thomas is a medical doctor with a large pediatric practice in Portland, Oregon. He's Dartmouth trained with board certifications in both pediatrics and addiction medicine, which he's helped over 1,000 patients with opiate addictions. Dr. Paul also has authored 3 books: The Vaccine Friendly Plan, co-authored with Jennifer Margulis. Then he has The Addiction Spectrum, which was a compassionate, holistic approach to recovery, also co-authored with Jennifer Margulis. And then most recently, he authored a very important piece, COVID-19 Life-Saving Strategies. So that's an alternative perspective to what you might be hearing in the mainstream media and with the fear mongering that so many of us are filtering through today. So Dr. Paul also has over 1 million subscribers on YouTube, on Paul Thomas MD, and a massive social media following on the other channels such as Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. So we are privileged to be able to hear from you on what I consider one of the most important issues facing America right now, and that is the war on parental rights. There's a huge push for one-size-fits-all medicine, and we've heard from the AAP, the AMA, that parents are in the way of making sure that that one-size-fits-all medicine can have a maximum uptake. So thanks for joining us again. I want to give you a really brief overview of the issue that I wanted Dr. Paul to comment on, and that is this bill that we are seeing that really embodies that entire AAP, AMA agenda to remove the parents from the vaccine decision and from healthcare decisions for children. And that is B23171 in DC right now, which is our nation's capital. So it makes it of particular interest to not only those in DC, but to all of us, because if we allow an egregious bill to happen in DC, what kind of precedent does that set down the road? So this bill, friends, allows children 11 years and older to be vaccinated without parental consent or knowledge. So it's not just the consent issue, it's also that this bill has provisions that makes it possible and actually mandatory for the provider, the educational institution, the insurance payer to conceal the vaccination event from the parents. And I believe that Dr. Paul would have some things to say about that as a provider who sees so many children within this age cohort, which I hope that you can tell us too, what it even means to lump in an 11-year-old with an 18-year-old who still needs consent to get a tattoo. So what comes to mind for you when you think about an 11-year-old making a medical decision?
Look, this is absolute insanity. And I would just, to put it in short words, fewest words possible, it's child abuse. It is ridiculous to think that you can take an 11-year-old out of the context of their doctor's office, out of the guidance of their parents or guardians, and say that that 11-year-old has the ability to actually consent and understand the pros and cons of the choice that they're being asked to make, which is, in the case of vaccines, a huge decision that most adults can't even understand. So obviously, this is completely abolishing the process of informed consent. I mean, you can go right back to the Nuremberg trials. This is abuse of that level that should not be allowed. And you cannot put this in law. My goodness, this is giving pharma absolute control of the bodies of children without, and then the fact that it's without the parents' knowledge, that's just mind-boggling. I'll tell you a quick story that just sort of puts this in context. Just in my practice, and I take care of over 10,000 children, and over the years, my office was taking care of almost 20,000 at one point, and I've cared for hundreds of thousands over my career of 35 years. So I've seen a lot, but I want to tell you about an instance that sort of makes me think of what this bill is trying to do. So in Oregon, children over the age of 15 or 16 can consent to vaccines at school without their parents' knowledge. So this would be kind of akin to what this bill, B23171 is proposing to do, but even at a younger age, all the way down to 11. So I had 2 cases of young girls, 15, 16 years old, who were excellent students and athletes, One was a dancer. I think the other was a soccer player, but they were good athletes, good students, come into my office at different times over the course of 1 year with complaints of dizziness. They couldn't focus. They had brain fog. And then they started losing the ability to walk. I mean, they were clumsy. They couldn't get on the exam table very easily. I sent them to neurologists, physical therapists, every person I could think of, immunologists, you name it. Nobody could figure out what was going on. I mean, we were checking them for Lyme. We were checking them for EBV, every possible random rare condition. And a few months into it, with the first of these two young ladies, it just occurred to me, hey, because I've taken care of these girls since they were babies. And I know all their vaccines. I'm their doctor. Their parents are always there. They're engaged, involved parents. I said, by any chance, have you gotten the HPV vaccine? Now, this was just a long shot. And the mom goes, oh, no. And the girl goes, yeah, Mom, I got that one. She says, no, you didn't, honey. Yes, I got it at school. So Mom had no knowledge she had been given the HPV vaccine at school. I had no knowledge she'd been given this vaccine. Only the child knew, and had, of course, made no connection with her chronic deteriorating autoimmune condition. And neither did any of the doctors, who none of them had even been made aware of the fact that this vaccine had been done. Now, this happened twice in 1 year. So this is not a rare or random thing. This is something we're seeing with the HPV in particular, but it can happen with most vaccines, that this sort of molecular mimicry or immune activation, whatever you want to call it, can trigger autoimmunity, which can be devastating, because autoimmunity can hit any part of your body depending on what is sort of, they call it homologous. I'm botching that word. Anyway, you've got a sequence in the vaccine that matches a sequence in your DNA. Now, we've got a COVID vaccine coming that scares the bejeebers out of me, because it is intentionally a messenger RNA piece of genetic material being inserted into your body if you're taking that vaccine. And there are already known sequences within that match a part of your placenta. So who knows what it's going to do to fertility. There's pieces that match other areas of the body that have already been figured out. This is potentially a very dangerous vaccine. Imagine now you're going to have 11-year-olds being, I would just call it plain old coerced, right? I mean, they're just going to be coerced into getting, let's say we're talking the COVID vaccine, or it could be the HPV or any other vaccine for which there are CDC recommendations, right? The CDC does not practice medicine, should not practice medicine. They don't have a license to practice medicine, but effectively they do when they can get laws written that allow anybody, the schools in this case, usually, the right to follow CDC guidelines. So this is how they get around the physician-patient relationship, which is vital, the parent-child relationship, which is critical. No child under the age of 18 should be just left to their own when it comes to things like vaccines. Here's the thing about informed consent with vaccines that just, people, you've got to understand this. You have to have choice when what you're being asked to do is a procedure. This is just standard in medicine. You've got an elective procedure that carries risk. So you have to have options. And one of those options, if it's informed consent, has to be not doing the procedure. Think of elective surgery. You want to go have a facelift or whatever. There is a certain risk to anesthesia. You should be told what that is. It's a known risk of death of 1 in whatever it is. I don't want to quote you a number in case I'm wrong, but it's a known risk, right? Knowing that risk, do you want to go forward with the procedure? That's your choice. That's informed consent. The same applies to vaccines. Children should not be put in a position where they're making decisions that, after being presented, by the way, only one side of the story.
Being presented one side of the story, and how you raise a really good point that the doctor-patient relationship is vital and the parent-child relationship is critical. Is it even possible for an 11-year-old or a 12 or 13-year-old to establish a doctor-patient relationship, to have an evenly yoked, so to speak, relationship with an authority figure?
Yeah, no, it's not. So another example from my own inner family, I have a brother who has 2 daughters, and the youngest one, when she was about 16 or 17, went to the doctor's office. And of course, at that age, they excuse the parents so that the pediatrician can have one-on-one with their adolescents, so they can, they want, maybe their child won't be honest in front of dad, etc. And so with my brother out of the picture, mom's at work, dad's taking his child to the doctor for a well visit. The doctor tries to talk her into the HPV vaccine, saying you don't need to tell your parents. This is a decision for you to make. And if you're afraid of what your parents might say, you don't have to tell them.
Mhm.
So, encouraging a child to break from the advice of their parent. Well, in this case, she happens to be my niece. She knows a lot about vaccines, and she was able to say, "Oh, there's no way I'm doing that vaccine. I have a, uncle who's a pediatrician and a doctor and very knowledgeable on this. And no, we've done our own research. We're not interested."
Wow.
But that's rare.
And that type of coercion happening without minor consent bill in the area, imagine what opens up the floodgates for, and without any apologies in these educational institutions and clinics that are set up around the community for these children to come in contact with constant badgering and influence outside of the parental relationship. And we know that in DC, the medical groups like the AMA and AAP came in and directly influenced these councilmen to pass this measure. So it passed 10-3 in November. I don't have the date in front of me, but this measure passed 10-3. And you have to wonder, how did that happen? These groups greatly influenced that. And parents need to know, Dr. Paul, maybe you can speak to this, that these groups represent the pharmaceutical industry and the medical industry, not the child. And so when we are listening to these organizations as a final authority on health, what does that mean for our children?
Yeah. So it's very interesting. So I'm a member of the Academy of Pediatrics. I'm board certified in pediatrics, and a lot of people in holistic and integrative medicine, such as myself, just sort of don't even become members, right? They just because they're so aware that these organizations are compromised by industry, and that's very obvious. I stay involved because I want to see what they're up to, and what I've seen is, they might be right spot on a child abuse issue or on seatbelts or helmets. They do amazing work. And then on the vaccine issue, it's like they've lost all sort of common sense. And it's like, clearly they're conflicted. And we've seen this, I've watched it. The AAP and the CDC used to actually go together in creating the vaccine schedule. And each year they would work together as a team and jointly roll out the new schedule for the new year. And this happened every year for the last 30 years that I've been practicing pediatrics, 35. The AAP sort of pulled back and just let the CDC run with it more recently, but they're clearly compromised with conflicts of interest. Folks, it's not, I hate when things get turned into conspiracy. It's just conflicts of interest. There's a huge financial incentive, and there's sort of, let's face it, it's kickbacks, but it's hidden. So you just don't see it. I mean, I'm a pediatrician. I'll give you an example of the pressure to vaccinate. I have an office with, like we said at the beginning, about 10,000 patients currently. And last year in August, we took a sample of every single super bill. So you come in to see one of my clinicians, myself, one of the other doctors or nurse practitioners. There's a little super bill that we're going to put all the charges for the day. On the back of it, I have a vaccine refusal form. So we say, this is the CDC schedule. Here's what you're supposed to do. And we circle all the things they're supposed to do. Because of informed consent, though, a lot of times they don't want any, or they only want some. So we put refused for the ones that they don't want. Well, we looked at a month's worth of the vaccines refused. We looked at their insurance. So this was actually done chart by chart to see how much was lost in my office by not administering the CDC recommended vaccine. You want to give a stab at how much the annual loss would have been to our practice?
Oh, Lord, annually?
Yeah.
500,000.
1.3 million.
Wow.
Now we bill out a little over 3 million a year the last few years. Imagine losing over a third of your overhead. So overhead in pediatrics runs about 80%. You can talk to any private pediatric office, and that's about what it runs. If you can get it down in the 70s, you're doing great. Well, we're right off the bat losing a third of our overhead. Total loss. Do you see the incentive? No wonder pediatricians are pushing vaccines. And that's not right. They're not pushing it. They're recommending what's recommended. And unfortunately, sometimes it's just the science is tobacco science. And I think the pharma industry learned from tobacco that you've got to overwhelm the system with science. We follow the science. You hear it on the news all the time, but it's not good science. It's like, You smoke a pack a day, I'll smoke 2 packs a day, and we'll see who dies in a week. Oh, neither of us died. Cigarettes are safe. And there's a study, we just published it. You see, we've proven cigarettes are safe. That's what they're doing with the COVID vaccine. They've had like 100, less than 200 cases of positives out of the 30,000, 48,000 in the 2 different trials. And just based on those few cases, tobacco science, we're going to declare this is 95% effective. It's just incredible. And they're stumbling over themselves on TV, the announcers, the doctors, the Faucis, it's like, this is so wonderful. Well, folks, it's not going to be wonderful. And you've just going to open your eyes. Unfortunately, a lot of innocent, unsuspecting people are going to line up to do their duty, to take the vaccine without any long-term safety testing and compare their outcomes to people who don't get the vaccine. That's the only real way of looking at the difference. And if you're actually looking, you'll see what's going to happen. And I just feel sorry for the folks who are going to put themselves in harm's way. But, we don't know. I hope they come out with an amazing vaccine, and we really don't know long term. But the signs are all pointing to it being very, very scary because of skipping animal testing, right? They skipped the animal trials phase for the COVID-19 vaccines. And the old animal trials that were done on the SARS and the MERS showed real problems when the following year, here's the deal. We really need to wait 18 months before we declare anything about safety. Because what happened was following time that they would then be exposed to the same illness, a large percentage or a significant number of, especially the elderly animals, died. We're talking death. That's not a good idea.
And these could be animals or humans that were not in the, prior to the receipt of the vaccine, susceptible to fatality. Those
Right,
fatality rates are very low in the majority of the population. And so looking at this, the DC lawmakers have specifically cited access to the COVID-19 vaccine as incentive to push this bill forward. And so like you're saying, giving a minor the ability to make a decision that could have implications a year and a half down the road, all holds barred. These children do not have the intellectual capacity, the emotional capacity to make those sorts of decisions.
No, and even worse with the mRNA vaccine, you are introducing this, the way messenger RNA works is it introduces itself into your DNA. We are creating GMO humans. And folks, we have no idea what that's going to mean long-term. No idea at all. It really,
terrifying,
it's horrible. This should have been stopped a long time ago, but they're just stumbling over themselves. And those of you who are on this video watching us, you're lucky to be somewhat more informed, and share this with your friends, because unfortunately you cannot turn the television on and get a bunch of propaganda that's not based on actual good science.
Yes. And that's speaking of that, before we wrap up, I would love for you to share a little bit about your recent study that was published. What was that, this week, or it came out this week, on why are these parents asking better questions? Why do people want informed consent? And the work that you're doing, Dr. Paul, exemplifies exactly why questions are being asked. So can you share a little bit about
Absolutely. So I've been honoring informed consent, and as a result, a percentage of my patients choose not to vaccinate. It's been a relatively small percentage, maybe a quarter at most. But I'm sitting on a lot of data, and what I was seeing in my practice was that the unvaccinated kids were just so healthy. And I would tell people that, and they go, "Oh, prove it. You're just talking. There's no data." Oh, show us the data. So I got an IRB back in 2015, and I tried to get that published. I failed. I'm a great clinician in the trenches. I'm not a great research, push it through peer review, because it just takes, it's a real tough thing to do when what you're publishing isn't what they want. Needless to say, long story short, last January, actually the medical board was after me over a vaccine issue, and I thought, all right, I'm just going to show you the data. So I did a quality assurance analysis. I hired a guy to come in, look at all the data of the patients in my practice, and he came in neutral. I mean, he actually was suspicious that I was way over exaggerating the benefit that I'm seeing in the unvaccinated. He would come out each day and go, "Paul, this is amazing. Your data just jumps out at me." I'm going, well, that doesn't surprise me, because we were seeing it. Anyway, that data showed amazing benefits to being unvaccinated, but it was not published in a peer-reviewed journal. So I went down that road of getting an IRB, that's an institutional review board approval, to look at the data retrospective. It's just looking at past data. This study was done so clean, we de-identified the data, and the person who de-identified it sent it to another researcher, James Lyons Wheeler of IPAC, who then, without ever knowing the identities, to this day, he has no idea who's who. He's just working a data set, finds the data that we published in our paper. And I think you'll be given a link to that paper in the attached to this recording, because you just got to go look at it. Look at a few of the graphs, actually graph after graph after graph. If you look at the unvaccinated over the 10 years, they had very few incidences of anything, whether we're looking at ear infections, asthma, eczema, eye infections, ADD, ADHD, behavioral problems. Autism wasn't significant because I have so few autistic kids in my practice. This data set was just looking at patients born into my practice. I have hundreds of autistic kids in my practice who joined my practice after being harmed. And a lot of times, I mean, I hear the story almost every week. My kid was doing fine till they got X and X, Y, and Z vaccines all at once, and we watch the lights go out in their eyes. Sometimes it's immediate, sometimes it's months after vaccines. The one when it happens later, it's hard to make the connection because it just sort of happens out of the blue. But sometimes it's immediate. I mean, within a day or two, they lose their kid. So there's no question. I mean, if you go to your doctor and they give you an antibiotic and you get a hives rash, allergic reaction, you call your doctor, you say, you gave me that antibiotic and my kid just broke out in hives. The doctor says, stop the antibiotics. You've got an allergic reaction. It's cause and effect. Somehow pediatricians cannot wrap their minds around the fact that if we do a bunch of vaccines and a kid regresses into autism, that it's cause and effect. Well, we need more data, obviously, but the data that I do have is making it crystal clear vaccines can cause harm, and unvaccinated kids do very well. Now, if I'm going to do true informed consent, which is what I do at every visit, I'm also going to tell you with some of these choices, there's risk and benefit, right? You've got to weigh it out. It's not a clear, simple decision. It's a complicated one. It's all the more reason there's no way an 11-year-old, let alone a 15 or 16-year-old, should be put in a position of having to make such a decision with so limited information, right? There's no way they can give them all the information they need. So we need to do everything we can to shut down this B23-171 bill in Washington, D.C. It's a precedent that will destroy the health of our nation. Absolutely.
Yes, and your study is exactly the reason that we need parents to be given informed consent. I feel like, this in our current climate, parents have to actually chase informed consent or go seek it out instead of actually being offered informed consent, let alone our minor children. And so thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for the things that you're uncovering on behalf of children all over America and the world at that. I do want to let our viewers know that you have a new website or a website up to help continue to raise funds for these types of studies, to continue to get this peer-reviewed research accessible to everyone. So please go to ftc.d for Dr. P for Paul approved.com. And this is where you can contribute to the fundraiser to continue to do quality research like Dr. Paul is doing with him and his team. And so go to that website, chip in, make sure that we're getting this information to as many people as possible. And do you have anything else to say about how they can contribute or follow your work, or where is the best place to do that?
So my website is drpaulapproved.com, DRPAUL approved.com. And there's also a very important prospective registry that's an ongoing research project needing funding, and that's PHOI, PHOinitiative.org. So if you want to specifically fund the prospective IRB approved registry that's going to follow kids for 18 years, that's a great place to go as well. I know a lot of requests are being made of all of us, right, who are really concerned about the health of our kids. So just realize any little bit that you can do will certainly be of great benefit. This is the kind of work that's not compensated by the interest that usually pay for studies. So we're just doing it on a shoestring, so to speak. And everybody involved with PHOI they're doing it voluntarily at this point. Massive efforts being put in without compensation, and that's fine. We just want to get the data. So it's all about getting the data and getting it out there. And in the meantime, thank you for watching. Thank you for your attention. And don't forget to do whatever you can to stop this bill.
Yes, and this work truly does represent the people's interest. The industry interests are well represented in the halls of government across the United States. And so the work that you're doing, the work that we're doing at Stand for Health Freedom is to represent you, the people's interests. So please go to those websites. We'll drop those in the links. And also, I will also drop a link to our campaign, our email campaign to tell Mayor Bowser to veto this bill as soon as it hits her desk. The timeline has not even started. The 10-day clock has not started for Mayor Bowser to review the bill because for some reason it's being held up in the council. So it hasn't been transitioned from the council to the mayor's desk to start that customary 10-day clock. So please go ahead, follow that link, send an email saying America is watching what is happening in DC, and we don't stand for minor consent bills, especially ones as egregious as this one that put our kids in danger and also put a lot of disenfranchised families in danger. If you look at the population in DC, this is a completely predatory bill that we're looking at. So thank you guys for tuning in, and we will see you later.
Thank you all.